Stats in a Wrap, the podcast series from Eurostat. Today we'll be digging into definitions in statistics through the lens of transport.
If countries start interpreting things not in the same way, the data would not be comparable.
Everything in the world, also transport, is constantly evolving.
Without these precise definitions, companies can't produce consistent statistics.
The fact is that the glossary will need to continually be updated.
Hello and welcome to Stats in a Wrap. I'm Jonathan Elliott, your host for this episode, and I invite you to join me on an adventure into the numbers, the data, and all the points on the map that tell the stories of the 27 member states and their 450 million inhabitants in all their dazzling diversity. Now, before a policymaker can decide where to invest millions or a researcher can compare safety performance, they must turn to the statistics and the data behind them. But anyone gathering that data must first answer a deceptively simple question. What exactly are we counting? Precision in definitions is the lifeblood of statistics. If you want to count all the trees in the world, you better be sure that a tree is still a tree if it is also a sapling, a shrub, a bush, or dead. The more precision in your definition, the greater clarity. The greater the clarity, the more useful the stats. And if you want to compare stats between countries, you had better be sure that every country agrees what is meant exactly and precisely by, for example, a railway wagon. Do you mean a silo wagon, a refrigerated wagon, or a wagon for intermodal transportation? An Irish ferry operator had better be talking the same language as a Greek or a Polish one if they're to report the size of their fleet. The question is how? Surely there must be some kind of dictionary or glossary of precise transport definitions so that everybody in every country knows exactly what they mean by ferry, coach, bus, or water taxi. Welcome then to the glory that is the Glossary for Transport Statistics and its 744 definitions. A collaboration between the European Union, the United Nations, and the International Transport Forum of the OECD, the next and sixth edition is about to be published. As well as all the transport bodies in the EU and beyond, nearly 100 experts from 20 countries offered their expertise in the compiling of the glossary, and it is a magnificent achievement in statistical precision, not to say statistical diplomacy. To guide us through this fascinating topic, we have four guests, all supremely qualified to talk about their specialist field. And it is my pleasure to introduce Stefanie Hille, who is a statistical officer at Eurostat. Stefanie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm very happy to be here in the podcast.
Next to Stefanie in our Wrap Cafe, we have Francesco Dionori, Chief of Transport Networks and Logistics Section and heading the work on transport statistics at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Francesco, welcome.
Hi, Jonathan. Great pleasure to be here.
Very glad you're here. And then we have Rachele Poggi, who is a transport statistics specialist at the International Transport Forum that sits inside the OECD. Rachele, wonderful to have you with us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you.
And finally, we're joined by Alice Favre, who is a rail data and statistics expert at the International Union of Railways, the UIC. Alice, welcome.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy to be here.
It's wonderful to have such an illustrious gathering of transport experts here today, and I think we're in for a feast of conversation and fascinating insights. Now, regular listeners to Stats in a Wrap will know that we often like to have a little icebreaker at the start of our podcast. I have to ask you all about how you look at transport in your everyday lives, because nearly all of us use transport often, very frequently. So, when you're travelling with family and loved ones, do you have to resist the temptation to share your knowledge about the technical details of the transport you see? Alice, let me start with you. You're a train expert. When you get on a train with your family, do you just feel like you'd love to tell somebody, do you know there are 4 types of rail passenger according to the glossary? Or do you leave all of that railway expertise behind you in the office and don't think about transport from one day to the next when you're not working?
Though, in fact, I leave this knowledge at work, but if there is, an opportunity to explain something interesting regarding, how railway statistics are built, etc., I like explaining things, yes.
Francesco?
Well, I'm very jealous of Alice because actually in my case, the transport work goes everywhere I go. I have a very inquisitive daughter who never stops asking me, why is that road sign like that? Or why are we measuring things the way we are? So it's 24/7, unfortunately, on my end.
Absolutely. Stefanie, how about you?
Well, I'm a mom of 3 kids below 9, and they sometimes ask me, Mommy, what are you actually doing at work? And then I talk about the glossary. And we live close to the Moselle, which separates Germany from Luxembourg. And I can explain to them quite easily whenever a vessel navigates through the Moselle, I can tell them what type of vessel actually passes through. And that is an easy way to explain to them what things are in the glossary.
Rachele, I have to ask you, one of your areas of expertise is in transport safety, especially road safety. Does this make you a little, hyper-vigilant in your day-to-day life when you're travelling?
Yes, I am. Definitely when I'm with friends, with family, I always remember them what to do, put the seatbelt, put the helmet on the bike, don't cross with the red light on the bike. So I'm always vigilant, and every day I take the bike to come to work. And I'm always doing analysis of what is happening with the pedestrian, with the bike, with the car. So I'm very vigilant, and I have always road safety in my mind.
Well, cyclists have to keep their wits about them on the roads, don't they? Let's just dive straight into the reason the glossary exists in the first place. Stefanie Hille at Eurostat, tell us why definitions are important and what happens when different countries define bus, ferry, or even types of railway line differently.
Well, so when it comes to transport statistics, definitions are absolutely crucial. They're like the common language everyone needs to speak. If countries start interpreting things not in the same way, the data collected on specific indicators would simply not be comparable between them. You mentioned in your question the term bus. Everyone has an understanding of what a bus is, and it seems to be a seemingly straightforward term. But what about, for instance, minibuses or trolley buses, both having the word bus in it? And here the glossary comes in. It provides a clear definition of what a bus is by stating trolley buses are excluded, specifying that's a vehicle that carries more than 24 passengers, and that clearly leaves out minibuses. So by defining a specific term as clearly as possible, the glossary really helps making sure that everyone is on the same page when talking about a specific term. And also in transport statistics, we are really interested in the details. When we are talking about roads, another term you mentioned in your question, we are not just interested, for instance, in the total length of a road network in a country. Yes, that's interesting, but we also want specific data on specific types of roads, like the length of motorways or the length of state roads in a country, for instance. And these details are really essential for policymakers. This is why we need so many detailed definitions in our glossary.
It's important to categorize different vehicles on transport, because if you don't, then you won't have accurate data.
With the U-Bahn, for example, that's very, very, you say that and you know what it is, and you kind of, in your head, you've got an idea of that. So making a standardized version of that means that everybody is on the same page about it. Everybody knows what it is.
I believe it's important because in the European Union, we are dealing with a lot of countries, almost 30 by now. So every country has its own data, its own definition, its own way of get the data and to analyze the data. So to make decisions at the European level, I believe it's important to have an harmonized data, harmonized glossary.
Okay, so we know definitions are essential for the EU and others to make useful comparisons between the transport systems of different countries. But the last edition was published only 6 years ago. Why publish a new one now? Rachele Poggi at the OECD, please enlighten us.
So as everything in the world, also transport is constantly evolving. So the last edition was in 2019. And from 2019, the world of transport changed a lot. So there was like the COVID, so there was new vehicles emerging to respond to the need of people to move not in the public transport. So we decided that it was time to do an update of definition. So we catch the rapid growth of battery electric vehicles. That is like a new thing. Then there was like a big expansion of shared and ride-hailing services. So also these services need a definition to be included in our glossary. And then also there are like new fuels that emerged for vehicles. So we need also to include those.
Another reason we need a new glossary is something called the Common Questionnaire. I want to ask Stefanie to tell us what this questionnaire is and how it applies to the glossary. Stefanie.
The revision of our glossary was really closely connected to the update of the Common Questionnaire for transport statistics. That's a questionnaire that is jointly managed by the UNECE, the ITF, and Eurostat. It covers more than 1,000 transport variables sourced from over 60 countries, and it provides data on transport by road, rail, inland waterways, and pipelines. The Common Questionnaire is not supported by a legal act, but there is a kind of gentleman's agreement among the countries to collect data in that area. The Common Questionnaire undergoes an update every 5 to 10 years, where new indicators are added, some indicators are revised, some indicators are removed. In the latest update, for instance, new indicators on charging infrastructure, as well as on cycling infrastructure in road, will be added. New indicators on inland waterway passenger transport will be added, just to name a few examples. So now a new version of the Common Questionnaire will be ready for release soon, and this new version of the questionnaire will be used by countries to report transport data for the year 2025.
It's interesting that you mentioned the international or global dimension there. Francesco, at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE, tell us how the glossary is being used outside and beyond the EU.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I think, at ECE, of course, our version of Europe is much wider. Our member states are, yes, of course, the European Union member states, but also countries outside the EU. The UK is included, the Balkans are included, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and North America. This, of course, gives us the opportunity to gather statistics from a wide pool, as well as, of course, assisting countries across the broad spectrum of ECE member states to improve their statistical gathering processes. So this is about spreading experience elsewhere, but it's also about gaining an understanding of what is going on in other countries to make sure that we have one integrated process. For us, this is done primarily through the Working Party on Transport Statistics, which is, of course, an intergovernmental body charged with really looking after the development of transport statistics across our ECE region, as we call it.
Now, there's a huge number of people involved doing this from lots of different organisations. Stefanie, just give us an idea of the scale of the workforce behind this and the number of decision makers that all had to work together to produce the new glossary. You've got all the different sectors of transport, you've got all the different countries, you've got loads of regulatory bodies, you've got people like the UNECE who have an even wider remit. Just give us a snapshot or overview of the diversity of input.
When we kicked off the revision of the glossary last year in the fall, so a bit more than a year ago, we reached out to experts through Eurostat, the UNECE, and the ITF. We approached all our member countries, who obviously then have many experts working on different transport domains themselves, including national ministries, national statistical institutes, other transport-focused international organizations. We contact EU agencies. We contacted colleagues in Eurostat with the relevant expertise in the different transport domains. I believe the other organizations did that as well. We contacted the European Commission's Directorate General for Mobility and Transport, DG Move in short. And I have to say the response was fantastic. So many experts came back to us. They signed up, willing to support us in the revision. And so altogether, I estimate that we had close to 100 experts on board from more than 20 countries.
that vehicle is not unique for Poland because it obviously exists in other countries, but the way it operates as an inter-metropolitan train, that is unique for Poland.
I mean, in the Philippines, we have this transport vehicle called Jeep. I think it's very unique and exotic in a way that it's only found in the Philippines.
Francesco, 100 experts, 20 countries, 3 supranational umbrella organisations, 12 transport groups. I'm already hearing a recipe for, well, let us say, a divergence of views, possibly a little bit of disagreement here and there. Just tell us what consensus building is like at that level across so many ministries, agencies and statistical officers. A lot of expert people with a lot of institutional power behind them, responsibilities, professional expertise, and all the rest of it, all have to work together harmoniously. How do you build consensus with a group of that diversity?
Well, that's a very good question. I think one of the important principles to start from is the fact that this isn't new. This is the process that we've had in place for the previous, maybe not all the previous versions of the glossary, but at least for the previous 2 versions of the glossary, is a process which we followed in order to get this buy-in and this stakeholder participation in the process itself. Obviously, everyone comes with their own experiences and their knowledge and their requirements, etc. It's very difficult sometimes to get people to agree on specific details. I remember the amount of time it took us, and Alice was there as well as Stefanie in these meetings, the amount of time it took us to agree the update of the definition of high-speed rail. Because each country considers high-speed rail differently in terms of speed, in terms of profile, in terms of technical parameters. So it really took a lot of backwards and forwards within these meetings to come to an agreed solution.
Rachele, the coordinating bodies were Eurostat, the UNECE and ITF, and they made up the Intersecretariat Working Group on Transport Statistics based in Geneva. Why were those organisations central to this project, and how did their participation and cooperation evolve? Who set up the architecture?
ITF is like an international organization working specifically on transport. UNECE and Eurostat, obviously, they are like much broader, but they have very important division and units working on transport statistics. So at the end of the day, we are doing the same, we have the same scope, and we are also working with almost with the same countries. ITF has some countries more in America and in Asia. UNECE is more concentrated on Central Asia and Europe, Eurostat Europe, but like a lot of our countries are the same. So the people that are providing us data are the same. So instead of asking the same people to, for example, send data to all of 3 organizations, we decided at one point to collaborate and also to divide the work. So there is like a lot of new things in transport, and the resources that we have, the staff resources especially in our organization, are very few. We are not too many working on transport statistics in those organizations. So we needed to divide the work to cover everything. So for example, in the last years, UNECE led the work on charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. So they took these responsibilities, they are collecting data, they are doing analysis on this. ITF took the lead for new mobility. So we did some report, we are like collecting some data, and we are focusing this on our work. Eurostat is more on the traditional transport statistics because they are obliged by legislation, so they do reporting of passenger transport.
Now, all the transport and related organisations we've discussed so far have been official bodies of one kind or another. But of course, the world's planes, trains and automobiles are made and operated by many private companies as much as public organisations. So there's now the added layer of complexity, and that's getting data from companies, private companies, to fit with the data of public bodies. Alice, this is where your organisation, the UIC, that is the International Union of Railways, comes in. Tell us more.
Just to explain that the main challenge is that companies produce statistics primarily for their own operational and managerial needs. Their data systems are designed to monitor performance, efficiency, maintenance, safety. not necessarily to meet the requirements of national or European statistical agencies. So when companies are asked to produce additional data for external bodies, it can be perceived as extra work with no direct benefit. But at the same time, companies want to compare their performance with others in the sector, but this is only meaningful if everyone uses harmonized definitions. That's why the UIC plays a key role. It works to align terminology, methods, and scopes so that the statistics produced by railway companies tend to be consistent.
So we've covered consensus building and getting the private sector to work with the public sector, but transport is not just dry policy, it's about people and their lives, and statistical definitions can bring with them emotional and ethical implications, one of them being road accidents and fatalities. Stefanie, tell us how the glossary handles the very human and ethical facets of transport statistics and how they impact policy.
Everything what we do in transport statistics can have policy implications. And this is why all definitions and all the statistical methodology can carry political sensitivity. And for this reason, here in Eurostat, we strictly adhere to the European Statistics Code of Practice, and that underlines the key principles of independence and objectivity of statistics. And you mentioned the example of an accident. And I think it's very important to look into details. So according to the glossary, and this aligns totally with the definition in the EU regulation, a killed person is defined as someone who dies immediately or within 30 days due to an accident. And this 30-day period is crucial because without having a clear threshold included, some countries would maybe just report those who die straight away. And that could potentially lead to lower accident numbers compared to the countries that include this extended time frame. And this shows again why clear details and clear definitions are essential. Without that, data would not be comparable. And in this specific case, in the area of accidents, the comparability is super important because policy needs that for evaluating safety standards, making informed decisions about infrastructure investments, safety regulations, and so on.
The railway network is enormous in Europe. There's enough rail in the 27 member states alone to go round the equator 5 times. Hardly surprising then that there might be a few features that need definitions. Alice, give us some examples about how definitions differ in a railway network that is so vast, technically complex and diverse. Francesco mentioned the challenges of defining high-speed rail, for example.
Okay, regarding high-speed rail, in fact, the subject is still ongoing. It's not closed. So in the next version, maybe we will have a full consensus for the definition of what is high-speed rail, really. In fact, railway companies, they report data from many different organizations like regulators, ministries, national statistics offices, or European agencies. And each of these organizations has specific reporting needs. So the statistics must be built on very clear definitions. For example, if we want to report tracks lengths, we need to know exactly what we call a track. Same goes for passenger when measuring passenger volumes, or for train when reporting train movements. Without these precise definitions, companies simply can't produce consistent and comparable statistics. In Switzerland, for example, there are many touristic trains also used for everyday travel. So railway companies in Switzerland include them, while in other countries, those passengers are not included in railway statistics because it's not considered as real passenger transport.
It's because there has been a lot of new developments on transport. There's new types of transport. We have electric cars became very, very common in the last, let's say, 8 years, 10 years. Electric bicycles also became very common. We have different kinds of electric bicycles. We have all these scooters around.
Rachele, let's just talk about the future now. As transport technologies evolve faster, might we expect the need for more frequent updates of the glossary?
I think for the next year there will be no update, but like we are constantly checking what is happening in the world. So I'm sure that in 2-3 years there will be need to include something. I don't know, maybe they will invent a vehicle that is like flying, and so we need to put this in the definition.
Yes, that's fantastic. Flying cars and self-driving cars, of course. Apparently, freight companies are using sailing ships now as a form of sustainable transport. And that's set to increase, as is the use of airships, which can transport small quantities of cargo quite slowly, but very sustainably. Fascinating. Stefanie, obviously there are challenges. We've talked about those. But let's try to end on an optimistic note. What are the opportunities? What can we hope for from a wonderful work of reference like this? And I suppose the challenges of keeping up with an ever-evolving sector like transport.
Transport technologies are changing fast. It's really important for us, for the member states, for everybody that definitions will then stay up to date. So even though we are not revising anything at the moment, of course we're keeping a close eye on the changes on the transport sector, to transport statistics, to what happens with the update of the regulation 223 in terms of using privately held data. And we see that probably there will come a time where we will then decide the glossary needs another update.
Francesco, where could the glossary go from here? I mean, at the moment, it's a bound volume. I'm sure it exists in digital form as well. Could it be interactive, for example? Could it be in real time? What potential is there for the evolution of the glossary, and what might that look like in 10 or 15 years' time?
We're here to serve our customers. We're here to see what they need. It's very much a demand-driven approach. So what will happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Actually, we should be asking member states what will happen in the next few years. The fact is that the glossary will need to continually be updated. There will be even more changes in electrification, more fuel types across all types of vehicles. So not only road, but also rail, also inland waterways. There will also be new types of mobility that we will need to consider. You mentioned a bit micromobility before, which is something very recent. But, innovation is going in so many areas that maybe we will need to start counting unicycles from 5 years' time, or parachutes or something else. I don't know, or different types of hovercraft or things like that. Flying cars, why not?
Well, we've run out of time, and it only remains for me to thank everyone who's joined us on the podcast today. It's been a wonderful tour of an extraordinary collaboration and a project that's really both fascinating in its detail and scope and breathtaking in its ambition. Stefanie, let me thank you first. Stefanie Hille at Eurostat. Thank you so much for your contribution today.
Thank you so much.
And Francesco Dionori at the UNECE. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me here today.
And finally, Alice Favre at the International Union of Railways. Thank you, Alice, so much for your contribution today.
Thank you very much.
And Rachele Poggi, who is at the International Transport Forum sitting inside the OECD. Rachele, thank you so much for your contribution today.
Goodbye, and thank you to you for your attention.
Thank you very much, everybody. If you've enjoyed Stats in a Wrap, don't forget to follow us on the streaming platforms where the show can be found on Spotify, Apple and YouTube, and share our adventures with friends and colleagues. And if you'd like to know more about the topics covered in this podcast and practically every aspect of statistics in the EU, you should make your way to Eurostat's amazing educational resource, Statistics Explained. It's really worth checking out. And of course, come to the Wrap Cafe for the next edition, in which we'll be showing how statisticians are using artificial intelligence to read millions and millions of job advertisements in the EU so they can build a picture of employment that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. This is zoomed in, high definition, cutting edge data science with gigantic quantities of information. And it could revolutionize the way we gather data for stats. Join us then, but for now, goodbye.